So let's have a look at some demonstrations. So in this first demo, I'm going to show how you can use $encode to save an encoded version of the password into the database, so you never have to actually store the real password in the database. So I'm going to start by creating a new username and password and storing into the database. And the password will be called test. So as we can see here, I'm first encoding it using the SHA1 algorithm, and then encoding it again into hex because I want to save into a string type of field. Okay, so let's have a look at the database now. Let's have a look at the database. And here is the username and the encoded password. So let's log in now. Let's do it clear. And let's log in as my test and password test and log in. And login was successful, but I actually want to debug this. So let's just hold. And again, Ctrl G. And my test login. Okay, so here, because we enter both the username and password, that's okay. First, we are going to encode using SHA1 and then hex because my field is a string. Then I pass the value that I just entered into the username, which is a database field, and I retrieve. And then, because the value is the same, the value of the password is the same, the encoded password is the same, then the login is successful. Just show here pass SHA1, and we can show here the pass hex with the stored one is the same. Okay, so in this demonstration I'm going to show how you can use the $encode for checksum verification. Okay, so I will start by uploading a file that I got earlier today from GNU-PG website. The GNU-PG, it's a data encryption software, and what they do is they publish the hash value for the file that you are allowed to download. So that's the file that I download, and that's the hash value that has been published. So after you download the file, if you want to encode using the same algorithm, which is SHA1 here, you can check if the file you download is not corrupt. Okay, so let's do that. I'm using file load / raw, and vfile is actually a raw variable. And then I'm going to use the SHA1 algorithm to encrypt the file. And I'm going to output it, encode again into hex, because my output field is a string field. And here is the hash value, and I can compare with the one on the website, and I know that the file is okay. Okay, now we are going to show how, by using ECB with a block cipher algorithm, you don't need the initialization vector. So we enter a string here. This is a screencast about encryption, and then we are going to choose, for example, a block cipher function DES. A key is required, so let's just make sure that we enter the right amount of data here. Okay, so that's 8 bytes, and I'm using ECB, so let's encode this. And once you start encoding, it shows that if the type of the mode of operation is ECB, you actually don't use the IV during the encoding process. So you can see the IV is no, and I went through the encoding. Here the VRAW data is already displayed here. And then I'm transforming from VRAW data using the algorithm base 64 so I can show it on the screen. Okay. Now if the mode of operation is a different one, for example CBC, well, let's first decode this again. Okay, and now if I use, for example, CBC and Encode, this time I need to provide an IV. And what I'm using for the IV is just a random value. I'm using $UUID, the first 8 characters here. So that's used during the encoding process. I transform into base 64, and then what I do is I concatenate the IV with the output, because the IV will be necessary again during the decoding. So you will see that the first 8 characters is the 7F, B, and so on. So here it is plus the rest, and during decoding the IV is extracted and used again during the decoding process. Again, it's important to notice that the length of the key is important. If I use, for example, a length that is wrong, for example, I use 11 bytes instead of 8, and I try to encode, then I'm going to get an error. Okay, and the last thing we're going to show here is how to use a hash function to encode. So let's choose one, for example here, the MD4, and as you can see I don't need a key to encode, and the reason is also because I cannot decode. Okay, once you encode using hash functions, there is no way to go back to the source.